Thank you for the wonderful introduction. The picture in the introduction made me look a lot cooler than I actually am. So yeah, welcome to Flight Path to Publishing. This is how I published my children's book, Thank You, Huey. I've published a total of 1 book so far, so this is by no means a how-to publish, or, and I don't consider myself an expert on publishing. If you want to know more about publishing, talk to Donna Cowan. She's the one that helped me get this book out, or Sarah Beth Williams writes for the Sentinel, and she's published more books than I have. But this is how I did it for my book, so hopefully you'll be able to learn something and kind of understand the whys and wherefores and the ins and outs. So it seems like self-publishing on the surface seems like a direct flight, non-stop, from point A to point B. Write a book, upload a PDF, and you're published, right? My ground track, however, tells a different story. So, as mentioned, I'm Mike Hazlett, as you all know that. And C.S. Lewis called himself the most reluctant convert. And I'm not comparing myself to C.S. Lewis in any way, but I'm perhaps the most reluctant author. English was one of my worst subjects in school. I'm dyslexic, I'm a terrible speller, I'm a slow reader. Becoming an author was the last thing I ever thought I saw myself doing. I majored in graphic design at Sac State to avoid having to write and read and do all that kind of stuff. Majored at a second bachelor's in photography by accident, and that's an interesting story. So why did I write a children's book to begin with? And that comes into, that's where the homeschooling comes in. My wife and I started homeschooling our daughter in 2012. And if you don't know how homeschooling works, oftentimes there's co-ops where parents get together and each parent takes a different subject within a topic. And this particular day we were doing sound. And so one parent takes musical instruments, things like that, because they have a music background. Another parent takes the ear and all the parts of the ear. And this is like 3rd grade level, right? So I took history and science, some physics, and the history of sound involves Chuck Yeager breaking the sound barrier in the X1. And I knew with a bunch of 3rd graders, my daughter included, especially my daughter, if I said, in 1940 and 48, Chuck Yeager broke the speed of sound in the X1, her eyes would glaze over and she would remember it. So I decided to take the story, make Belle a character, the Belle X1, and it's kind of a little engine that could, I think I can, and she faces this hurdle and she breaks through and she does it, right? Well, it worked, and I just threw some thumbnail sketches together, scanned it into Illustrator, plopped it into an InDesign file, I'll talk about that later, and printed out 1 copy of the book, read it to the kids that day. They loved it, my daughter loved it. She wanted me to read it to her every night at bedtime. And it worked. My daughter is an adult now, and recently she went down to Southern California with some friends, and they went to the Paramount Pictures Museum. And they have a model of the X1 that was used in the movie The Right Stuff. My daughter texts me a picture of the model, and she says, "Look, Dad, it's little Belle." She didn't say, "Oh, there's a model of the X1. Oh, there's the plane that broke the speed of sound. That's the plane Chuck Yeager flew." It was Belle. So children's stories have a tremendous capacity to educate and to touch our children. So a few years later, still homeschooling, but I'm doing freelance work, and I started working with, back then it was called the Doolittle Center. Now it's the Roland Center for Freedom in Flight. It's based at the Nut Tree Airport. And they took delivery of a UH-1 Huey. And does anybody know the real name of Huey, by the way? Some trivia. The actual name of the UH-1 is Iroquois. So Huey's the nickname. All Army helicopters are named after Native American tribes. So we have Iroquois, Kiowa, Apache, Chinook, Blackhawk. So At the time, there was several aircraft that were there at the time. There was a P-51 Mustang from World War II, a Sea Fury, and I'll talk about the different characters. And I remember thinking, you know, here's Huey, this Vietnam-era helicopter, coming in on this flatbed truck. And we all know the reception that our Vietnam veterans received returning home was a lot different than our World War II veterans. And I've talked to, in my photography, I've talked to veterans from all conflicts. And our Vietnam veterans still carry scars, not only from what they saw overseas, what they experienced, but what they experienced coming home. So that's kind of where Huey's character comes from. Huey is, in the book, Huey is very melancholy. He doesn't want to be bothered. He doesn't want to talk about the war. He doesn't want to talk about his experiences. And one of the other aircraft that was there that day was a P-51 named Sparky. Sparky is the actual name of the P-51 that lives there. It is owned and flown by Brant Seghetti. And if you want to know how Sparky got its name, I will tell you after the presentation. And it's a funny story. And so Sparky's character in the book comes from flight characteristics of a P-51 Mustang. He wants to fly high and fast, he wants to do aerobatics, he wants to do all the things that helicopters can't do. Another aircraft that was there that day was a Hawker Sea Fury, and this one was painted in Australian markings with D-Day invasion stripes. And this particular one on the tail had a nameplate that said Iraqi Air Force. So I would love to know more about the history of this particular aircraft and how it went from the Hawker Aircraft Company supplied aircraft to Australia during and towards the end of World War II. How it ended up from there to Iraq to the Nutry Airport, Northern California. There was a Pitts Special. A Pitts Special is a purpose-built biplane for aerobatics. It's not World War II, but it's designed to do aerobatics, and again, things that helicopters can't do or that they're not designed to do. The actual Pitts that was there that day was November 5 Delta Delta, which is there in the picture. I changed it to Ruby in the book because the name just fit and it's way cuter. And Ruby is flown by Marilyn Dash at Reno Air Races, or was. I don't know if she's still active or not. Miss Mitchell is kind of the mother teacher figure of the hangar, and that's based on B-25 Mitchell. The actual B-25 that was there was Tondaleo, and Tondaleo is owned and flown by the Collings Foundation. And they did not use the name Tondaleo for two reasons. One, it's difficult for children and parents to pronounce and to read in a book. And number two, it's a children's book. I wanted to keep it G-rated, and the nose art isn't exactly appropriate. I didn't want to have emails and phone calls from parents going, why did you put this in the children? Ryan STA, Sport Trainer A. The Ryan Aircraft Company made the Spirit of St. Louis, so there's a chance that this was on the same assembly line as the aircraft that Charles Lindbergh flew. So he's another character in the book. Mac the Crane is a McPherson crane, provided the heavy lifting to bring Huey, lift Huey up and then set him down and attach the rotors and all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of where the characters came from. And I'm photographing this and I'm thinking about the characters as I'm photographing it. The next day, there was a community event at the hangar. And there were people from Vacaville community were there, some community leaders, some veterans, the people from Rice Aircraft that worked on the restoration of that particular Huey. So in the book, these people come up and they say, thank you, Huey, for saving my life, or for saving the life of someone they know, a family member, aunt or uncle or grandmother, grandfather. And in the book, Huey realizes that he can't do some of the things that the other aircraft can do, but what he can do is very important. And he's designed to do what he does, and he does it well. And he's designed to be different. He flies in a different way. And that kind of goes back to homeschooling and some of the struggles I faced as a student, and then seeing my daughter struggle through some of those same things. And some of those struggles what might be a struggle in one area is an asset in another. So, and that's kind of what I wanted children to learn from the book, is that we're not all good at everything. Doesn't mean you can't do something, it just means that there's some things you struggle with and some things that you excel with that somebody else needs. So that's it, right? Photograph an event, write a book, throw some sketches together, publish it. Done, right? Now, again, my ground track tells a different story. So I have a background in graphic design, so I know how to get ink on paper. I knew I could throw this together in InDesign, crank out a PDF that I could send to a printer and order 2,000 copies and have a bunch of boxes of books sitting in my garage, right? But where does that get me or anybody else for that matter, right? I reached out to a couple of publishers and got nothing. One of them forwarded me to what I would call kind of a vanity press, kind of there's kind of a fine line between vanity press and self-publishing, and I'm still kind of learning that area. But they contacted me and they said, we'll do the illustration and the layout. And I said, well, I've already done that. Well, what else are you going to do? Oh, well, that's all they do. Everything else was extra. And they wanted quite a bit of money for illustration and layout. So at the same time, I was busy homeschooling my daughter. I was taking care of my mom through stage 4 metastatic breast cancer. And I just could not make the time to devote to researching, publishing, and figuring out what the best way was to get this book out. Eventually, I looked into Bridgeway Christian Church over here in Roseville. They have an authors community. And so I talked to some of those people, and they recommended Donna Cowan. And I wish she were here today, but I did invite her. But without her, Huey would not exist. She walked me through, we had like 3-hour Zoom calls where it was, okay, you upload the PDF here, you create an account here, this is the description, this is the long description, this is the short description, this is the one that goes on Amazon, this is the one that goes to Ingram, this is one that goes, so all of those kind of ins and outs. So here's kind of the workflow. I'm not going to bore you with too many details on what type of graphics and all that, but the vector graphics were done in Illustrator, the raster graphics were done in Photoshop. That all goes into InDesign. These are all Adobe software, and I'm not an Adobe spokesperson or anything like that. It's just, this is industry standard. This is kind of how the industry works. Although Canva is gaining more functionality now. They're starting to compete. InDesign cranks out a PDF that the printer can use, which means it's CMYK, color separated, has bleeds, and all of the things that your printer needs to put ink on paper to make their job easier and have it go smoother, right? So that's kind of the workflow. This is some of the Photoshop files. There's 3 layers to these Photoshop files. There's an outline layer, ink layer, and then a background layer. So I went with Ingram Spark. There's Kindle Direct Publishing, KDP, and Draft to Digital. There's a whole bunch more. These are the ones that I am more familiar with. And like I say, I'm no expert, so I'm not necessarily recommending you should go with Ingram Spark. It just depends on what you want to do with your idea and what kind of audience you want to reach out to. I went with Ingram Spark. And this is kind of how that looks like. I bought the ISBNs from Valker. So every book has to have its own unique ISBN. Valker has a 10-pack. I would recommend getting the 10-pack. You're like, oh, you have one book and you want. Each edition has its own ISBN. So the hard copy has its ISBN, softcover has its ISBN, and the ebook has an ISBN. So one title, there's 3 ISBNs for one title, right? So I got those from Valker. If you go with KDP, Kindle Direct Publishing, you can buy the ISBN with when you upload it to KDP, I think. But I think Amazon still gets it from Valker. Or you can get your own from Valker and say, here's my ISBN. So Like I say, I've done this with grand total 1 time so far. So I have an account with Ingram Spark and uploaded a PDF there of the book, a PDF of the cover, and that goes into Ingram Content Group. So any bookstores that are part of Ingram Content Group will see my book in their catalog, right? It'll show up. Or so you can go to Barnes & Noble over here at Birdcage, and you can ask for Thank You Huey by Mike Hazlett. They'll look it up. They don't stock it on the shelf, but it's in the system that they have access to. So they can find it, they can order it, and then it's print on demand. So when they get an order, the order goes to Lightning Source, and those are the people, they're part of Ingram Content Group. They're the people that put ink on paper. And they're actually based in Tennessee. I think they have printers in other areas. Donna told me they have one, I think, in Fresno, but I'm not sure about that. My books come from Tennessee for whatever reason. So when somebody orders from Ingram Content Group, Lightning Source puts ink on paper and then ships it to the bookstore. Does that make sense? Yeah. I can order author copies from my account, and that still goes to Lightning Source, and then they ship it to me at cost. So I pay cost and wholesale because I uploaded my reseller's license to Lightning Source, so they don't charge sales tax. So I make more profit from direct sales. I get to keep more of that money. If someone buys a book through Amazon or Barnes & Noble, then Amazon or Barnes & Noble gets a piece of it, Lightning Source gets a piece of it, Ingram Spark gets a piece of it, and I get a piece of it. So by the time it's all said and done, I'm making maybe about $4 a book, depending on the cover price. So I'm not getting rich off of this. I make a little bit more selling directly, but those sales don't count, right? I could order 1 million copies and be bestseller, right? And they're all just my copy. So they don't count, author copies don't count towards your sales total, right? So it's kind of a trade-off. More money in my pocket, but the sales don't count, so nobody else sees those sales. Or a little bit less money in my pocket, and then other people say, oh, this book is climbing the charts, right? It's starting to chart, so there you have it. So what I've learned so far is we're all the pilot in command. We make our own decisions, good or bad. But things tend to work out better when we listen to the control tower. Pilots have a saying, trust what you see and not what you feel. And that refers to when you get into a cloud or it's at night, you can't see the horizon, it's easy to get disoriented. And there's an actual instrument in the cockpit actually called the attitude indicator. And it's one I need to check often. Sometimes called the artificial horizon. And that will tell you which way is up. And you might feel like you're turning, you might feel like you're whatever. Check your attitude, and that will tell you which way is up. If you're lost, contact the tower and get your bearings. And if the tower vectors you away from where you think you want to be, you never know. Trust what they're telling you. Because when I look back, and I had this book sitting on the back burner, I had this project for 10 years, from the time I wrote it to the time I actually got ink on paper. And it was frustrating, and there were diversions, and there were layovers, and I was in a holding pattern. But I got to spend that time with my daughter going through school. I got to spend that time with my mom through her last days. And I wouldn't trade that for anything. So that was my flight path to publishing, and I hope you found that informative and maybe even inspiring. Questions?
Well, I do have a question. So, Mike, I'm familiar with your book. Thank you so much. You had mentioned that some of these characters are actually at the nut tree in their museum. Which characters are still there today, if we wanted to go see them?
Good question. Unfortunately, there was some changes in direction, we'll call it, over the last 10 years. None of those aircraft are in the hangar today. Some of them come and go. Sparky still lives at the Nut Tree. Tondaleo, like I say, is owned and flown by the Collins Foundation, and they're based out of Massachusetts. And Tondaleo goes on tour throughout the country. So Tondaleo lives at different airports, or Miss Mitchell. I don't know where the Sea Fury is. I think it still might be at the Nut Tree. Sparky's still at the Nut Tree. The Ryan STA is still there. A couple characters I didn't talk about is the Gonzalez biplane is still at that museum, and I really highly recommend seeing that. It is one of the earliest examples of an airplane besides the Wright Flyer. It was built in San Francisco by the Gonzalez brothers, and it is, I think, possibly the earliest surviving airplane. So the Smithsonian Institution actually wants it, from what I'm told by the Senate. It's all wood, just the wooden frame is there, you can see it. The Gonzalez brothers built it out from Popular Mechanics article in probably about 5 or 10 years after the Wright brothers' flight. So that's how old the Gonzalez biplane is. It's sitting over here at the Nut Tree in Vacaville. So really, it's really cool. They've done a lot with that museum. Yeah.
Thank you for doing that. I've actually built 3 of the planes that you mentioned. I build model planes and ships. And yeah, the B-25, the P-51, and the Huey. Is there a follow-up to this?
I have, well, the first book was about the X-1.
Okay.
Technically, that was the first book that I wrote.
Okay.
I just ended up publishing Huey first because it seemed a little bit easier. It was more ready to go. But yeah, I plan to publish Bell's Big Breakthrough, which is about the X-1 breaking the speed of sound. And then I want to do a follow-up with Huey, where Huey is called back into service to fight the California wildfires. Cal Fire still flies Hueys. I tried to get a Huey here today, but the guy that I know that owns one, the guy that I know that owns one donated it to a museum in Arizona a few years ago. So but I did call him up. I said, "Can we get a Huey?"
Had I known, I would have brought mine.
Sacramento County Sheriff flies a UH-1.
Yeah.
Cal Fire flies a UH-1. Merced County Sheriff flies a UH-1. So yeah, the next community event, maybe we'll get a Huey.
There we go. Perfect.
Any other questions? Yes.
You were going to share a story about Sparky.
Sparky, yeah.
Oh, how
he
Sparky-
said off the microphone. Off the mic. Off the
Off the
mic.
record, I'll tell you.
Off the mic.
Oh, I can't wait.
Off the record, here.
Yes.
You got any books with you?
I have one book here for the raffle. I didn't bring extra I have some extra copies of paperbacks.
So if someone needs a book, a hardcover, do they just email you, or how do they?
Yeah, they can just,
Personalize them, let's just say
Yeah.
that.
yeah,
Okay.
you can email me.
Perfect.
I'll buy more after take some for day.
Yeah.
So, do you have any of your books over at the museum here at McClellan?
I do not yet. I haven't talked to them yet. My books are available at the Nut Tree Airport, at the Roland Center for Freedom in Flight, and at A Brighter Child on Greenback and Fair Oaks. So you can get their signed copies at Greenback and Fair Oaks. So go to A Brighter Child, tell them I sent you.
Perfect. Awesome.